Vanessa and Tim, our colleagues from the library, who are going to tell you all about how to prepare your thesis for submission. Okay, so I will hand over to Vanessa now, and Leslie can start recording.
Okay, that says recording now.
Thank you.
And we'll stop recording before questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. Basically, sorry, I'm Vanessa. I'm a cataloger here at the library. So once you've passed your Viva exam and your thesis has been sustained, you need to send the thesis to the library, where we will catalog it, create a record for it, and make it accessible through the thesis collections. Joanna, if you can just move the slide. Sorry. Okay. So basically, it's the process of submitting thesis is very simple. You need to fill in the thesis deposit and declaration checklist form, which is basically just information about you, about your school or department, information about supervisors of any sponsorship you had for the thesis, and some other information we need to put in the cataloging record. The other form you need to send is, of course, your thesis in a PDF file, and a separate summary in a PDF or a Word file that is 300 words at most. 300 words limit is there just so it fits easily and displays nicely in the library catalog. Joanna, if you can just add another slide, sorry. Basically, also, if you have any additional files, if you're, for instance, if it's a music file or if it's any kind of data files, you can also add them to the thesis, which will to your submission. There is instructions on the PGR website and on the library guides of what type of files we accept as well. This option is once you submit the thesis deposit and checklist form gives you options whether to embargo your thesis. The reasons why you want to choose to embargo your thesis is if certain parts of the thesis or the whole thesis might be published, and publishers want you to keep it inaccessible. So there are 3 options of embargoing your thesis. Basically, thesis can be embargoed for up to 5 years. So from 1 to 5 years. You can embargo the thesis for absolutely everyone, because otherwise the thesis will be open access and it will be accessible through the library catalog, but also British Library harvests our thesis and make their own cataloging records, and then they put a link to the university collections. So if you embargo the thesis for everyone, that means that neither the university members or any other public user will be able to see it. But there's another option as well. You can embargo the thesis just for non-university members, which means that the thesis will still be shown in the library catalog, and the university members will be able to access it, but everybody else won't be able to use it. And basically, these are all the simplest instructions which we have for the library. So I've put in some thesis resources for you. So these are the main pages about how to write and submit your thesis, pre-viva and post-viva as well. Basically, that is all. Once you have passed your Viva exam, you will be asked to send the thesis files to the library, which you can send either to the cataloging department email, or you can use the Zen2 services if you have a larger file, or if you are concerned about any security issues sending it through email. And that is about it from me, unless you have any questions.
We'll take questions at the end if that's okay. So if you we'll hand over to Tim now, and then once we stop the recording, we'll take questions then. Okay, thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. Thanks, Joanna. So you've got me now for a few minutes, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about copyright and your thesis or your dissertation. Apologies, there are quite a few slides, but if you can keep flicking through them, Joanna, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. So yeah, why should you care about copyright? Well, basically, we are whizzing through these just to keep me going. But yeah, your thesis, as Vanessa said, is will be made open access for other people to view. So if you're reproducing any third-party materials, that's material produced by other people within your thesis, you'll need to think about copyright to make sure that you're using that material legally, because if other people can see it, there might be an issue if you're not using stuff correctly. So when you reproduce third-party material, there are three main ways in which you might be able to do that. You've got sort of three main options, and I'm going to go through each one of these in turn. So it's a nice sort of little flow chart that you can go through when you're considering whether it's okay to reproduce other people's material in your thesis. So the first thing to think about, thanks, Joanna, if you could skip on to the next one with Mickey Mouse there. Public domain. So this is anything where the copyright has expired. My example there is Mickey Mouse in Steamboat Willie. I don't know if you know that the copyright on that expired quite recently, but basically, when the copyright ends, the work, whatever it is, goes into the public domain, and it means that anybody can reuse the material without any restrictions. So basically, if you're reproducing material in your thesis, like that might be literary stuff like text that's written by somebody else, or it could be images or stills from a film or whatever it is, if it's been more than 70 years since the person who made that work when they died, then that material is in the public domain and you can use it without any restrictions. If it's a broadcast, like a television program or a radio broadcast, the copyright on those lasts for 50 years from the year when it's broadcast. So that's the first thing to consider. Is the material you're using actually in copyright? And if it's not, then you can use it without any worries. But you might discover, a quick note, something to be aware of. There is copyright as well in the way that material is laid out on the page. So it might be a very old work, maybe the works of Shakespeare or something. Shakespeare's been dead for absolutely ages, so his writing is all in the public domain. But if somebody's made a new edition of the works of Shakespeare and they've maybe put new text and they've laid it out with different fonts and they put different formatting, there is copyright in the way that is laid out, and that lasts for 25 years. And there's also copyright in translations of works from one language into another. So just be aware, just because the original work might not be in copyright anymore, if it's a new edition or a translation of it, just check it's not still in copyright. Thanks, Joanna. If we can pop on to the next one. Okay, so if the material you want to use is still in copyright, you might still be able to use it, and there are various ways that you can do that. And the first one of those that I'm mentioning here is what we call copyright exceptions. And these are basically just provisions in the copyright law that say that you can use works in certain circumstances without requiring permission from the creator or the person who holds the rights for that material. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Joanna. Yep. So there's different circumstances when you can do this, but the main one that's going to be of relevance to people here is what we call Section 30. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize what this is, but this is basically just a provision that allows you to use material for criticism, review, quotation, and news reporting. So you might see how that can obviously fit in with a thesis, because presumably if you're using material in your thesis, you're most likely to be criticizing it or reviewing it or quoting it or using it in that kind of way. This provision, it doesn't allow you to use absolutely anything though, or any amount of material. It's got a provision on it which is called fair dealing. And so you just need to remember these few things here to see if the use that you're making of the material would be counted as fair. So it should be proportionate. If you, maybe you're critiquing a poem or something, if all you need to do is just quote a few lines of the poem to make your point, don't reproduce the whole poem. Just reproduce what you need, so don't use too much. You should include an acknowledgement to the original creator. I mean, normally you would do that anyway in a piece of academic work, but it is also a requirement in the law that you do that. So make sure you include that. And another key thing to remember is that your use of the material shouldn't cause what we call market harm to the original. So generally that means not reproducing other people's works in their entirety, although occasionally that is justified. But it just means not making a substitute that for the original that other people could freely access. So that might mean maybe not reproducing maybe an entire artwork in a high definition picture, or not reproducing a whole photograph again in high definition that somebody else could just take it and use instead of the original, because that undermines the rights of the original creator. So yeah, they're just a few things to think about as to whether something is fair. Now you might have things that you want to reproduce in your thesis that you think actually that doesn't really fall under that exception. So that might be when you want to have maybe an appendix where you reproduce entire works, like whole poems, for example. Had a query about that actually just the other day. Somebody wanted to reproduce whole poems in their appendix. Or it might be that you've got things in there that's maybe just for decorative purposes, possibly not in a thesis, but it does happen occasionally. And in those kinds of instances where you think maybe it's not fair to reproduce the whole thing, maybe it would cause market harm for the author. In those instances, you'll need to request permission or use a license to reproduce that material. So if we could have the next slide, please, Joanna. Thank you. So yeah, certain works might be licensed under what we call an open license, and that is where the creator has kind of released that work out into the wild for anybody to use, so long as they obey certain license conditions. Most commonly that's done with what we would call a Creative Commons license, and these have different kind of restrictions on what you can and can't do. So if you're using material under an open license, just make sure that you're following the license conditions, and it would usually include things like crediting the original author and perhaps not using the work for commercial purposes or not making changes to it, that kind of thing. If there isn't an open license on the material, or if you see something and it doesn't say that it's got a license on it, just assume that the original creator has retained all their rights, and in those circumstances you'll need to request permission then to reuse the material. So if there's no license and if it doesn't fall under the exception, that's when you need to request permission. So yeah, you would then want to contact the rights holder. So you need to track them down and find out who holds the rights for the material. And you'll have get in touch with them, and you'll have hopefully a sort of conversation with them about reusing the material. If they agree or whatever, just keep a record of any kind of correspondence that you have with them, just in case there's, in the rare occurrences when there might be some kind of, come back to it later, just make sure that you've got that agreement in writing just to refer back to in case there's any issues further down the line. Okay. It might not always be possible to get permission to use things. So if the material you want to use isn't covered by a license, isn't covered under an exception, and either the person refuses to let you use their material or you just don't hear back from them, in certain instances you might need to remove material from your thesis, from the publicly deposited version, if you can't get the right permission for it. But that's kind of a last resort if you can't use any of the other options. Thanks, Joanna. What's our next slide? Okay. And as Vanessa's already mentioned, you can request a thesis embargo when you submit it. So that's kind of thinking about your rights, because you will hold copyright in the stuff that you've created as part of your thesis. So maybe if you were planning to publish that, you might want to have that deposit put, that embargo put on your material. Okay, that is everything I wanted to cover today about copyright. So I realised that a very quick whistle-stop tour, but we've got a page here that goes through all of those things. There's a flowchart checklist that you can go through just to make sure that everything's okay. And if you have any further questions, or you look through that and you're not quite sure still whether your material that you're using you can use it legally or not, you're welcome as well to get in touch with me or with the library, and we'll be happy to advise you on that one. Okay, thanks very much. Does anybody have any questions?